Hey there! Welcome back to another episode of CUPE Cast. Are you hoping to learn more about unions or progressive movements? Then you're in the right spot. My name is Brianna Plummer. I go by she, her pronouns.
And I'm Brittany Nisbet, and I use she and her pronouns, reminding you that we're the only podcast of our kind, combining union info, pop culture, and more, kicking ass for the working class, one podcast at a time. Whether you're a member of CUPE, in a union, wish you were in a union, or just found us while browsing, you are definitely in the right place. To hear more episodes, look for the CUPE Cast anywhere you stream or download podcasts. And for future feedback or future episode ideas, don't forget you can email cupecast@cupe.on.ca. That's CUPECAST at cupe.on.ca.
If you ever travel by plane, then you most definitely were helped out by a flight attendant. Did you know flight attendants do a lot of work behind the scenes to ensure that your flight is as comfortable and as pleasant as possible? But what you didn't know is that flight attendants work for an average of 35 hours per month unpaid while they carry out their duties. That's right. So join us today to do a deep dive into the airline sector campaign, Unpaid Work Won't Fly.
Yes, we cover this and so much more. So today, join us and listen to CUPEcast episode 35, Pay the Workers. It's just plain smart. So welcome back to another episode of CUPEcast. I was originally thinking we could start this episode off by asking what's the song Toxic by Britney Spears and Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio have in common. But then I was like, oh, that's not going to work because we already let the listeners know that this episode's about flight attendants. So I guess it won't really work, eh?
I think we pretty much gave it away, but that's okay. Flight attendants are really ingrained all throughout our pop culture throughout the years.
Yeah, and their job always seems so glamorous. So, like, you spend a day working on a plane and then you land in like a different province, state, or country, and you have time to explore a new place while you're on your layover. Like, who wouldn't love that?
I know, right? Especially like right now in Ontario, it's winter. Although
Yeah,
it's spring, it's
yeah.
still acting like it's winter.
I call
So,
it Sprinter.
there you go, sprinter. So it's really great to like just, land in a destination where it's beautiful and sunny and it's warm and you don't have to worry about your winter jackets. But you know what? The media wants us to think it's all about, the glamorous lifestyle. But we've seen flight attendants through so many books, movies, and music videos. And I'm curious if any of our listeners have seen any movies or read any books about flight attendants. If not, we're just going to name a few in this episode. So let's start with the reality TV series on CW called Fly Girls. This show came back out in 2010.
Yeah, and as a reality TV junkie, I am really sad to say that I somehow missed this TV show, especially because, like, in 2010, I loved the CW. Like, I don't know how I missed it.
That's okay. I also missed it as well. And you know what? It only aired for a season and then it was unfortunately canceled. And also, it was back in 2010. So it could be why you missed it.
I don't want to think about the fact that 2010 was 14 years ago.
I
I'm
know.
sorry. But yeah, that would make sense. But I'm still going to look into it. Like it might be a fun and easy watch, like the reality TV stuff, we call it like brain candy. So I might still look into it. But did you know that there's also a book called Fly Girl? So it's not reality TV, but it's a memoir. It's actually pretty cool. The author, Anne Hood, writes about her time as a flight attendant in 1986, but the book wasn't published until 2022. So a
That's
little bit
right.
more recent.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm willing to bet it's a little bit more realistic to what our guests today would be talking about, too.
Yeah, you're probably super right. So I haven't read the book myself, but I looked it up on Goodreads and it had a 3.81 star rating. So I think that's like pretty good. Like it's out
Yeah,
of
that's
5.
above average. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'll just read like the synopsis for you guys. So it says in 1978, in the tailwind of the golden age of air travel, flight attendants were the epitome of glamour and sophistication. Fresh out of college and hungry to experience the world and maybe one day write about it, Anne Hood joined their ranks. After a grueling job search, she survived TWA's rigorous breach training academy and learned how to evacuate 7 kinds of aircrafts, deliver a baby, mix proper cocktails, administer oxygen, and stay calm no matter what the situation. In the air, Hood found both the adventure she dreamed of and the unexpected realities of life on the job. She carved Chateaubriand in the first class cabin and dined in front of the pyramids in Cairo, fended off passengers' advances, and found romance on layovers in London and Lisbon, and walked more than 1,000,000 miles in high heels. She flew through the start of deregulation, an oil crisis, massive furloughs, and a labor strike. As the airline industry changed around her, Hood began to write, even drafting snatches of her first novel from the jump seat. She reveals how the job empowered her despite its roots in sexist standards. Packed with funny, moving, and shocking stories of life as a flight attendant, Fly Girl captures the nostalgia and magic of air travel at its height and the thrill that remains with every takeoff.
As you were reading the synopsis, Brittany, I was
Yeah.
like, ooh, but I can't say ooh like while you were reading. So I
You
was
could
like,
have!
do it in mute. But the book sounds very interesting and it's probably a great read. I'm
Mhm.
definitely very curious about the labor strike part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested. Like, I obviously, neither of us have read it. So, like, we can't, like, say if it's a good book or not, or if she was, like, in favor of the labor strike or not. So, like, we don't know. We're
Yeah.
not gonna like push it one way or the other. But that caught my eye too. Like I'm definitely gonna check out my local library and see if they have a copy of the book because I love to read and this just sounds interesting.
Yeah, and you're also part of a book club, right? This probably might be a very good book
Ooh,
to, show to your book club friends.
I
Maybe one
love that
day.
idea.
Yeah.
That's so smart. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, so try it out and see if your
I am.
other members are going to be interested in reading that book.
I will. Oh, that's such a good idea. Oh my god, I can't wait.
So now that we talked about flight attendants in pop culture, let's get ready to take off and inform our listeners about CUPE's airline division, shall we? So, according to CUPE's website, the airline division represents over 18,500 members who are flight attendants from multiple airlines. So, this includes Air Canada, and under Air Canada, there's Air Canada Rouge, WestJet, which also includes WestJet Encore and Swoop, Air Transat, Sunwing, Calm Air, PAL Airlines, Canadian North, Flair Airlines, Pivot, and PansCan. The larger airlines like Air Canada and Air Transat have several locals, each with their own executive and a national executive committee. Members from the other airlines are represented by one single local. The CUPE Airline Division is the governing body that oversees members from all these locals.
Yeah, so this is different from the sectors that you and I come from, Brianna, where our
Yeah.
locals are more like centralized in one location. But with CUPE's airline division, they have members who work from coast to coast to coast. And it's one of the divisions that actually makes up the transportation sector in CUPE.
Yeah. So, like as we mentioned before, when you think of flight attendants and their actual jobs, sometimes we think it's a very glamorous job. And if you look up TikTok, YouTube, there are no shortage of day in the life videos of flight attendants on social media. So, if you're very interested, you could just type in "day of a life of a flight attendant" and you will see everything. They get to travel and see new places all the time. However, when we read about the actual duties of flight attendants and what they're required to do, it's actually a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a bit. And so I'm going to read out some of their tasks, so get ready because it is a way more than people might think. So we pulled this information just so folks know from the Unpaid Work Won't Fly website. So besides just supporting with boarding passengers, providing food and drinks or performing the flight safety demo, flight attendants are responsible for the safety and security of the passengers and the plane while it's on the ground and in the air. Flight attendants are required to know the safety systems of every plane they're assigned to and be able to conduct safety checks for windows, equipment, and potential leaks, spills, or structural damage inside the aircraft.
Yes, and when it comes to passenger safety now, they must ensure that the safety rules and procedures are being followed and provide assistance to mobility impaired passengers, unaccompanied minors, and service animals. They must know how to identify and respond to emergency situations. So this can range from administrating first aid or unfortunately dealing with a death on the plane. To me, depending on the passenger and the situation, flight attendants can play many roles.
Oh, totally. And while they're paid for some of their duties, many of them are actually performed unpaid. So I want to share a recent TikTok that I watched online, and I'm gonna like say, like Brianna totally found it. I did not find it. And then when she sent it to me, I went down a rabbit hole and I watched all of them. So the content creator, her name is on TikTok. It's at Fly with Bernice, and she does fun facts about being a Canadian flight attendant. And there's a bunch of different videos, but in this specific video, she highlights the unpaid labor. So here, take a listen.
I'm on airport standby reserve for 2 more hours and I'm bored, so we're going to start a series called Fun Facts as a Canadian flight attendant. This is part one. Did you know that Canadian flight attendants don't actually get paid until doors close to doors open? That might be different for some airlines, breaks on, breaks off, stuff like that, but the point is, we don't get paid for boarding, we didn't get paid for delays, we don't get paid to check the airplane if it's good. So if you're frustrated because your flight is delayed, so are we flight attendants, because we showed up in our uniform, ready to work, and we're not even getting paid for that. Yeah, I know, it's messed up.
I agree. This is totally messed up. Based on what at Fly with Bernice stated in her video, it seems like a lot of the tasks they perform is unpaid, but it's expected to be performed in order for the plane to take off. Fly with Bernice channel does highlight all aspects of being a flight attendant in Canada, and we'll include a link to the video we played in our show notes. But we do encourage you to check out her channel. It has some really great content for anyone who would like the inside scoop about a day of a life of a flight attendant.
Yes, while I was going down the rabbit hole, I think she did 10 in that series. I think she did
Oh
10
wow.
days. Yeah, I watched a lot. Watched a lot of them. They were really good. But there is not only the unpaid labor flight attendants also at times they miss out on the key moments in life. So where it may be easier for like you or I to be present at a loved one's birthday or travel to see families during the holidays, some flight attendants are working and they often miss those moments. So, like we had March break recently, it was a couple of weeks ago. So for folks who might not know what that is, it's similar to the American spring break. So it's a week where, kids aren't in school. And so during March break and other peak holiday seasons, think like Thanksgiving or Christmas, many people are traveling and visiting their families.
Yes, and you actually brought up a really good point. So I read a CP24 article titled "Here's What People Are Traveling This March Break." They do these articles, like usually during peak holiday season, so this is nothing new. And according to this article, Toronto Pearson Airport, which is the airport in Toronto, and it's one of the largest airports in Canada, stated that almost 140,000 passengers were expected to pass through Pearson Airport, with nearly 1,000 flights taken off every day during March break. So just
Wow.
imagine the number of flights that are going in and out of Pearson and the number of people in the traffic, right? And so, in order for all these flights to take off safely and successfully, it means many hours of unpaid work from the flight attendants.
And besides not being paid for their work, there's often other issues affecting the workers in the sector. We'll bring attention to just a few. So, a big one that is near and dear to my heart is health and safety. And so, as someone who is part of I'm the co-chair for the CUPE Ontario Health and Safety Committee. I understand like just how important it is to ensure that workers have a safe work environment.
And to shed some light into the situation, there has been increased workplace violence towards flight attendants, ranging from verbal assaults to grabbing, punching, and kicking, and even actions that are deemed more violent. So, workplace violence has seemed to increase during the pandemic. And in 2020, QP National actually created a document to guide flight attendants to use their rights to refuse unsafe work. This is especially important as Bill C-65 actually came into effect in 2021. So, for our listeners who might not know what Bill C-65 is, Bill C-65 is an amendment to the Canada Labor Code, and it aims to, quote, create a safe environment for workers who have experienced violence or harassment to come forward, end quote. The new legislation affects all workplaces that fall under the federal jurisdiction, so this will also include the flight attendants. If you're interested in reading more, we'll add a link to the document in our show notes.
Yeah, and there are also airlines that are continually trying to save costs. And one of the ways that they're doing that is reducing the number of flight attendants assigned to the flight. Um, And that is just like something to be concerned about. So I
Mhm.
know that CUPE has been really proactive to work to bargain language in the collective agreements to have one flight attendant per 40 passenger seats on some aircrafts. We have seen this bargaining language incorporated into collective agreements between CUPE and Air Canada and Air Transat.
Yeah, and another point to highlight, which will tie into a story we're just going to talk about, is the lack of regulation and legislation to protect Canada airline industry. So, like most industries, the airline industry has succumbed to pressures today's economy. So we know with inflation and rising costs,
Mhm.
it has impacted a lot of industries. QP has always taken the stance of funding public services that will benefit Canadians and not corporations. So, an example where we've seen corporations have failed is the airline Lynx Air. I don't know if you heard of this story, Brittany.
Yeah, so it's like pretty recent news, eh? So,
Yeah.
so like less than 2 years into entering into the market, Lynx announced that it was ceasing operations on February 26th. So, according to a statement on their website, they say the compounding financial pressures associated with inflation, fuel costs, exchange rates, costs of capital, regulatory costs, and competitive tension in the Canadian market have ultimately proven too steep a mountain for the organization to overcome. So this is extremely unfortunate because it was literally just like a few short weeks after flight attendants voted to join CUPE. So Lynx Air flight attendants
Yeah.
were a part of CUPE, and it really did catch everybody off guard. And the ceasing of operations was pretty immediate.
Yeah, usually when companies go out of business or there's huge changes, sometimes it's usually like weeks they plan it out or months. Like this was literally days.
Mm.
And it's very sad to hear about this because, at the time, like Brittany just said, the members voted to be unionized and join CUPE. And they joined CUPE because they wanted to address concerns about working long hours, workplace burnout, and just to bargain for better compensation. So Gloria Coley, a flight attendant at Lynx and a member of the organizing committee, stated in this news release. So this is a news release that came out when it was announced that the Lynx Air flight attendants were joining CUPE. So Gloria said, quote, "We're thrilled to be joining CUPE, where we'll have the support and the resources we need to achieve fair wages and clear work rules in a strong first collective agreement," end quote. It really breaks my heart now that, a few weeks later, these flight attendants are potentially out of a job.
Yeah, it's especially like it's so sad. And so,
Yeah.
like, as the announcement came out, CUPE did, of course, put out a statement. So CUPE President Mark Hancock responded and said, "We are devastated for our members at Lynx and all the employees who lost their jobs today. While this is a hard day for the employees of Lynx, they are better off for belonging to Canada's largest union. CUPE will represent them and defend their rights in these difficult times. We will fight to ensure the employees get everything they are legally entitled to."
Yes, so there are 240 flight attendants who were impacted by the shutdown of Lynx Air. And we know this story is ongoing, and we hope that the members get something out of the situation.
Yeah, and we have shared just a little bit of CUPE's airline division and some of the issues the members face. But as usual, we try to get somebody who has lived experience to speak more to the issues. So we were able to sit down with Wesley Lesosky, the president of CUPE's airline division, to hear more about the CUPE's airline division.
Yes, I'm so excited for our listeners to hear this interview.
Yeah.
We'll go into a deeper dive into some of the things we've already discussed earlier in this episode, but you get to hear a perspective from someone who works in the airline industry. Well, without further ado, here's the interview with Wellesley. We'll be back after the interview to close out the episode. Today, we're happy to be joined by Wesley Lilowski from CUPE's airline division. So thank you for joining us today. Just to give our listeners some insight, last fall, I actually attended the OFL's Youth Summit, which was part of their OFL convention. And I met a young flight attendant who spoke a lot about the unpaid Won't Fly work campaign. And I was very interested about that campaign, and we were able to connect. So when Brittany and I discussed about talking about the Unpaid Work Won't Fly campaign, I instantly thought of this young worker, and he was able to connect us with Wellesley. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Brian for connecting us and making this interview possible. So thank you, Brian. So we're going to start our interview right now. And Wellesley, can you start by letting our listeners know a little bit about you and your role as the CUPE president of the airline division?
Yeah, so I'm Wesley Lesosky. I am a flight attendant actually with Air Canada. And I have been the Air Canada component president. So my primary function is to look over the Air Canada mainline flight attendants as well as Air Canada Rouge flight attendants. As well, I am the elected airline division president of CUPE. So I look over the 18,500 flight attendants within the airline division through our Council of Presidents. So each airline has its own president through their local or component. That's the table that I preside over.
Amazing. Well, thank you
Yeah.
for telling us all of that. So like you had mentioned, I'm going to repeat you a tiny bit. You said that your division represents 18,500 flight attendants, which, holy cow, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So could you maybe, and you said that you yourself were a flight attendant, so perhaps you could tell us like what does a day in the life of an airline worker or a flight attendant look like from like the second they wake up to the second they go home?
So I can speak from my experience. So
Yeah, yeah.
typically, if I have a flight or a flight assignment starting tomorrow, I would go to bed tonight, and then I wake up tomorrow. I'm preparing my suitcase, ironing my clothes, checking traffic to make sure I can get to the airport on time. So then I get to the airport typically hour and a half before flight departure because our check-in time for Air Canada is about an hour, hour and 15 prior to departure. So this time is actually unpaid, but required to be there.
Mhm.
So from there, we would go to the communication center or comm center, as we call it. We'd pull our roster, pull our schedule, possibly meet our crew. For me, I'm based in Vancouver, so I'd hop on a bus from the Air Canada hangar and then go to the airport, meet my crew, do a briefing, meet the pilots, do a briefing, get on board, do our safety checks, do galley prep checks, just check the aircraft for security sweep, that kind of stuff, make sure there's no deficiencies or anything. And then we would prepare to board, typically 40, 45 minutes before departure. And then we would board the plane. Then we do all our briefings for any special attention passengers, any infants, all that kind of stuff. At the whole time monitoring for luggage, intoxicated passengers, all that kind of stuff at the same time. And then we would close the door and start our flight,
So
at which point we
you
start getting paid.
I was just going to ask, you had already kind of started saying it, and that was actually leading into my next question because I thought it'd be kind of interesting to hear, like, what does it look like, and then where do you start getting paid? So that's a heck of a lot of work beforehand. You said like an hour and a
I
half at
agree.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all, most people don't understand it, but it's all kind of, I'll call it the heavy lifting. So it's
Mhm.
when I'm briefed on who's on board, anyone that requires extra assistance, any passengers that require any special assistance, any cargo that's dangerous good, perhaps, any galley deficiencies, anything broken with the plane, any security issues, any customs and immigration issues, like all that's kind of done. And that's done before the flight. And then during the flight, of course, we're monitoring for compliance of regulations, luggage compliance. There's a whole array of different things, right? Once we get in the air, it kind of turns to service, as one knows, as well as monitoring for safety. We're always doing that. But on the ground, we could deal with somebody that passes out. Recently, somebody who, gave birth. Like there's a whole array of things that could happen on the ground. And if that flight's delayed because of these instances, often we're not paid for that. And that's the
Jeez.
big challenge because that's,
Yeah.
again, when we kind of do the heavy lifting. Not to say that those issues don't happen in the air, they do.
Mhm.
But at that point, we're paid, and that's part of the job, respectfully, right?
Mhm, mhm. And so
Yeah.
how, from like your experience, how would you say this differs from other sectors?
The fact that we're not paid,
Yeah.
it's a real, it's a
Yeah.
real basic one to me because I
Yeah.
don't know of anyone that shows up to work unwillingly and doesn't get paid. If we
Mhm.
start in any union, non-union job, federal, provincial, there's a form of compensation that one gets. And I find it challenging to understand why flight attendants aren't paid at that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's interesting. So I'm not aware of anywhere else that they solicit for free labor and required free labor. Like you must be
Yeah.
there an hour before, or you can be
Yeah.
disciplined, right? Like that's a thing. So, yeah, that's I think where it differs.
Oh, so you can be disciplined for not showing up on your own time an hour and a half beforehand, but you're not being paid. That's
100%.
insane.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That's insane. Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my gosh.
So that's a lot. So can you highlight some of the issues members face on the job?
Like from just being a flight attendant?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, I mean, outside of the unpaid work stuff, we deal with intoxicated passengers, we deal with death on boards, we deal with a whole array of issues like that, a whole bunch of, I don't know, we deal with the delay aspect, we deal with hotel issues, we deal with transportation issues on the job. We deal with hurricanes. Like you can imagine everything. We're literally transplanted to a different place, and typically everything runs good. Don't get me wrong. But when it hits the fan, it really hits the fan, and that's obviously the challenges. But yeah, we definitely deal with a lot. And post-COVID, I mean, you can imagine during COVID, we were mask police, vaccine police.
Yeah.
Social distancing at the beginning, going into unknown areas, say Asia, say Europe, not knowing what you're coming back with. So post-COVID, though, I found that there's a large entitlement from the customer standpoint.
Mm.
Planes are a lot fuller, and there's a little bit more aggression.
Oh.
People feel that
Yeah.
they're entitled to more. My bag should go up here. I should be getting a meal. And I'm talking on behalf of all airlines at this point, right? Because obviously some of us are low cost, some of us are, national carriers. So there's a little bit of a difference, obviously, by the airline. But definitely one of the most common things is the entitlement that flight attendants are dealing with on board. And obviously, our flight attendants have also taken a step back saying, hey, wait a minute, why am I dealing with this? I don't have to
Yeah.
deal with this. This isn't part of my role. So
Mhm.
I find that that's the biggest thing is just there's a lot more gentle confrontation.
And I mean, we could get into a whole other conversation about the health and safety aspect too of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like like there's the health and safety aspect more of, like, I mean, like the mental load that takes for the people that you're working, like the flight attendants. That's just crazy. So, anyways, mm, so in our episode, before we were joined by you, we chatted a tiny bit about the Lynx Air shutdown and its impact on CUPE members who worked for that employer. So
Mhm.
if you don't mind, would you share your thoughts about the shutdown and what you hope will be an outcome for the members who were affected?
Yeah, they were unionized for a very short period of time, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
But we have retained legal to take on the bankruptcy aspect of that. And then we've also reached out to some of our respective employers, say, hey, can we fast track these individuals if they apply and Links is on there? So that helps. For me personally, I actually worked for Canada 3000, probably well before the time you were born. And that company acquired two airlines and then went bank, like folded, closed. And we
Oh,
had just joined CUPE at the same time. So
Wow.
kind of a similar scenario, except they didn't absorb a whole bunch of people. But you know, uh, that's what we're trying to do is kind of learn from that and go forward and try and see if there's a path to get them into other airlines. Because typically when you pass the interview, you go through the training, you're working on the job, like you are an asset, you are skilled, and you have the basic understanding, right, of the 6 to 8 weeks training. So
hmm
that's the hope
hmm
for sure.
hmm
Okay, so we know that the CUPE Airline division has launched the Unpaid Work Won't Fly campaign. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that campaign and how did it get started and what its objectives of the campaign?
Yeah, so I'll start with the objectives because that's the easy part. We want to be
Yeah.
paid. That was really simple. That's obviously the goal. How we want to get paid, our collective agreements are different than most. Our industry, sorry, is different than most. And so obviously our collective agreements are. So we're not a 9 to 5, you show up, you get this wage, and we want an increase of 10%. That's not kind of how it works. That's the bargaining agenda. But we're just currently at the stage to ask the federal government, hey, there's a minimum wage, there's a minimum standard federally. Why aren't we part of that? How that would tie into a collective agreement could be totally different because obviously we are not looking to be paid those hours and lose here to balance it out. So we're still at the same gain. We're
Mm.
looking to be compensated for that time because we're putting in time to be compensated. Kind of started at the airline division, I guess a couple of years back, the discussion, the formulation, and pretty much again post COVID, because we saw such an increase of our members requiring external assistance, possibly food banks, stuff like that, to support themselves in their entry level areas, as well as the cost of living going up, mortgage rates, just a whole bunch of stuff, as we know. pardon me, post-COVID, and coming back from, I can speak to Air Canada, some people almost at 2 years coming back from a layoff.
Oh,
So it was
yeah.
really hard to try and catch up. And you're coming back from a layoff, and you have to picture, Air Canada, we had, let's say, 9,000 employees, 7,000 being laid off. You're coming back to work. Some of those people had up to 20 years. So they went back into the workforce, obviously, and realized, holy cow, I'm getting a job as a server at 18, $20 an hour. And look what I'm making as flying. Whoa, we haven't been keeping up. So the push was really towards the union to say, like the members are coming to us saying, hey, this, like, why are we putting in all this free work? How is this happening? How did we fall so far behind so fast? So that's where it kind of came from. And from there came the educational point. We had information pickets at all the airports, which were very well received, very much by the membership, but also by the public. We didn't
Amazing.
have,
Yeah.
yeah, there was no negative, which was incredible to me.
That's so
And
great.
you can always imagine people believe in unions, people don't, people believe in the cause, people don't. So I was really mentally preparing myself for like, oh, there's going to be an onslaught of negativity. We
Yeah.
didn't get that. It was a lot of people that were like, wow, I didn't know that. You mean every time I board an aircraft and somebody says hello to me, you're not being paid? Or when you help me through the airport, or when you're assisting with a wheelchair passenger, or people found that crazy. So it
Because it is
really
crazy.
helped kick off the campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because it is
it's
crazy.
yeah, it's really one of those things where you're like, I don't get it. So yeah, I kind of organically grew from there. And then we had a lot of support, just moving it forward, and here we are.
And I'm sure our listeners want to know how they can support this campaign and a lot of the work that the flight attendants do. So, is there ways that our listeners can support the campaign if they're interested?
Yes, they can go to unpaidworkwon'tfly.ca. And on there, we have luggage tags. And our luggage tags pretty much say that unpaid work won't fly. They can put that on when they're traveling. They could talk to cabin crew and say, hey, I wasn't aware of this. Kudos to you. Or I heard the program. Thank you so much. Any of that kind of stuff boosted. Giving the flight attendant an opportunity to talk about it is the way we can talk about it. Obviously, we can't come to your seat and say, hi, I'm Wesley, I'm your flight attendant today. I'm not currently being paid. Um, but the reverse, hey, I'd like to talk to you about it. I didn't know this. It gives them kind of that way to tell the true life story where you can actually relate. And I think that's big, because when people do find out, how we're compensated, how much we're compensated, and then how much free time some of us put in, it's incredible, because it limits your growth. To kind of put aside, sorry, I could talk on this all day, but to kind of put a side
Oh,
spin on it, it limits you from even getting a job at McDonald's or 7-Eleven or Dairy Queen. Not that those jobs aren't good, but I'm saying
Yes.
those are opportunity jobs that typically would in the past have worked around your other schedule. It's very hard when you're a flight attendant on call 4 or 5 days a week to say to, as an example, McDonald's, hey, I can work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you have an irregular operation in London and you don't get home till Sunday and you lose your job. So it's
Right.
limiting that kind of part-time aspect. Even for a flight attendant holding a schedule, there's still what's called irregular operations that can change your whole roster, right? So it really is a big deal. But when you hear it from a flight attendant that's in that position, that's currently struggling, you totally are like, wow, I didn't get it. They have so much control on your life, yet aren't required to compensate you for any of that, right?
Gosh, that's cool. I can't. Well, I'm really
yes.
glad that you like gave us that insight. And I got one. I have one of those luggage tags. They
Oh,
were giving
perfect.
them out. Yeah, I got it at the CUPE National Convention in October.
Yes,
Um,
yes, you're handing them out.
yeah, and it was fantastic because I had to fly home. So I just
Yeah,
stuck it straight on my luggage. And it then also, like, not only does it support the cause, but it also makes it easy to find your luggage
yeah.
when it's on the belt. They're very nice though. I like that's like a really great like swag item for the campaign. Like that's very smart. Like I love that idea. So whoever came out with that idea, kudos to them.
Thank you.
Um, those are, oh, was it you?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's like a novel idea, because flight attendant, it's I don't know, I think of Las Vegas, and then I think of like a waitress in Las Vegas. They always have a whole bunch of pins, right? They'll have their union pin,
Oh,
local
okay.
40, and then they'll have I've been here for 10 years, and then I support, whatever's going on. Flight attendants collect bag tags. It's just something that they
Oh,
do. And
Oh,
so it was something where it was kind of like, if we give this to you, we know you'll apply it and it'll be shown. And then where we place our bags are obviously at the front and back of the aircraft. It's always going to be hanging there. So it's always visible. right? And
I
I
love
think
it.
that's the important part because it keeps it alive. It's a slow burn until bargaining. So we need to keep that momentum going, right? So yeah.
I love it. Brilliant idea. That's
It
great.
is
I
a
didn't
really
even
good
think of,
idea.
yeah, I didn't even think about like where you put your own luggage too. Like that makes sense. So those are some awesome actions that our listeners can do as well to support you. And we don't really have any more questions today, but we are happy to talk with you longer. If there's anything you want to mention, anything you want to tell us, anything you want to tell our listeners, last words, feel free to share. This is whatever we missed
No,
that you think is important.
No, I love and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so, so much. And I think the big thing is unpaidworkwon'tfly.ca. Like, go check it out. Any questions, comments, anything where you're like, this doesn't make sense, please reach out. I answer all the contacts that get sent there,
Amazing.
or all the emails that get sent through contact. I answer. I'm really proud of this campaign, but I also feel that, a lot more can be done with support. We had 17,000 people sign the petition to the government.
Wow,
17,000. That's huge.
that is
Most
huge.
big petitions maybe reach 2 or 3,000.
Yeah.
So it shows that people don't support it, and it's just irrational on how one could, in my opinion. So yeah, I think on the last words is please go, please fill it out, and any ideas, any comments, I embrace it all.
Thank you. We'll make sure to include a link to the Unpaid Work campaign in our show notes so folks can
Mhm.
check it out. And if they're interested in signing the petition, they'll be able to access the petition through that link as well. So we want
Awesome.
to thank you once again for joining us today in our podcast. We really do appreciate it. I know our listeners will learn a lot from hearing your story and hearing your perspective and learning a little bit more about flight attendants and the inside scoop about their jobs. So for our listeners, we'll be back with closing remarks.
And we're back. Wasn't that a great interview? We
Yes.
hope, yeah, it was awesome. So we hope you all enjoyed today's episode. And again, a special thanks to our guest, Wesley, for joining us. So make sure to show your support to CUPE's airline sector by visiting their website, unpaidworkwon'tfly.ca. And before we wrap up, we have just a few closing announcements. So since April is here, we are getting closer and closer to the CUPE Ontario Convention, and the deadline to submit resolutions is fast approaching. So if you are interested in submitting a resolution or a constitutional amendment, they are due on April 12th. That's right. You heard me, April 12th. That means there is not much time left.
And speaking about convention, don't forget the awards. The applications to submit for these awards are due April 30th, and you can nominate someone for the Sister Solidarity Award, Health and Safety Award, Injured Workers Advocacy Award, Racial Justice Award, and the new award, the Pink Triangle Advocacy Award. Nominating is a great way to acknowledge the hard work someone in your local or in QP District Council is doing. We'll leave a link in the show notes if you're interested in learning more about these awards. Also, a quick plug, don't forget about our episode Convention Baseball. We did this episode back in May 2023. So if you'd be attending convention and it's your first time, we highly recommend listening to that episode. It's a great episode for people to listen to and check out.
Yeah, or if it's like somebody in your local or CUPE council or what have you, and it's their first convention, you might want to let them know to take a listen because your very first convention can be very overwhelming.
It can.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to episode 35 of CUPE Cast. Pay the workers. It's just plain smart. This podcast was written and researched by us, Brittany and Brianna. And we want to take a moment to thank all of the CUPE Ontario staff involved with this episode, because without them, this podcast really wouldn't exist. If you have future podcast ideas, please email us at cupecast@cupe.on.ca. That's CUPECast@cupe.on.ca. We also want to thank our good friend Mohammed Akbar for being the edit master, because this podcast really would not sound as great as it does without his talents.
And before we close out, we want to thank you, all our incredible listeners, for tuning in to this episode of CUPE Cast. Please continue to look for us anywhere you stream or download podcasts. So this includes Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or CUPE Ontario's website. Please follow or subscribe to the CUPE Cast. And if you listen to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Write us a review, leave us a message, and let us know what you thought about today's episode. Also, share this link with your family, friends, and fellow members in your local. Our show notes have tons of information you could share with your friends and colleagues, and we hope this will help you learn more about the airline industry. As usual, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Sending solidarity.